This is Mark Boone of Hong Kong Baptist University's Religion and Philosophy Department with a Christian perspective on ethics. Ethics is important, but how are we supposed to know the difference between right versus wrong? And does the idea of right versus wrong even make sense? Isn't it all subjective? And even if it's not subjective, how are we supposed to know the difference between right and wrong when there's so much disagreement over morality? And these are some of the major questions people ask these days about ethics. Fortunately, there are some good answers. First, though, let's survey some of the territory. I think ethics makes sense. It's not simple, but it makes sense. Now, why isn't it simple? It's not simple because there's a lot of territory to survey in ethics. There are, to name only a few things, duties and obligations, happiness, human nature and the proper functioning of the human being, motives and intentions, the result of our actions, and character and habits, and on top of all of that, a Christian must also recognize the importance of God's commands. Now, as it turns out, these different moral concepts, these different pieces of the puzzle, these different aspects of morality, fit together pretty well. For a start, it helps to know how different moral traditions and philosophy piece together two or three of these concepts at a time, emphasizing one of them as the test of right versus wrong action, and emphasizing another one or two as the point of ethics. The tradition of virtue ethics, here think of Aristotle, looks at character to know the difference between right and wrong actions. What is right is what a person of virtuous character does. This tradition aims at achieving happiness by functioning properly as human beings. The tradition of deontology, here think of Immanuel Kant, looks at intentions to know the difference between right and wrong actions. What is right is what is done with a good intention or a good will. This tradition aims at obeying our obligations. And then there's the tradition of utilitarianism. Here think of people like John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism looks at the results to know the difference between right and wrong actions. What is right is what leads to the best results. Utilitarianism aims at achieving the greatest possible happiness. But now that we've identified these moral traditions, haven't we just found out where people disagree on ethics? And worse than that, how they disagree on how we even learn about ethics? Well, sort of. Let's say I give money to a beggar, and I mean well, but the beggar takes the money and uses it to buy some alcohol and gets hopelessly drunk and stumbles onto a busy street and is crushed by a bus. A utilitarian tends to look at the situation and say that my action was wrong because of the bad results. A deontologist tends to say it was right because I meant well. But these traditions are capable of much more agreement. They often do agree more than people think. Even in this situation, they both agree that the results are bad and the intention's good, and they both think intentions and results matter, which brings us to the next point. Let's observe this. A utilitarian and a deontologist will normally agree that both good intentions and good results do matter. And even though these traditions have different starting points, those central concepts, one is the test of right versus wrong, and one as the goal of ethics, although they have these different starting points, those central concepts, it turns out most or all of the other concepts are worked into all three of the traditions anyway. Aristotle's virtue ethics also covers intentions, obligations, and results. Kant's deontology also covers character, results, and happiness. Mill's utilitarianism also covers character, intentions, and obligations. Fitting the pieces of the puzzle together is a hard job, but the great moral philosophers have already done a lot of the work for us, and here's another analogy that might be better than that of a puzzle. This is almost the same analogy as that used by a philosopher named Derek Parfit, who tries to put together deontology, utilitarianism, and another tradition, not virtue ethics, a fourth one actually that we're not even surveying in this video. In Parfit's approach, he says that the philosophers in these different perspectives are like people hiking the same mountain range, but starting in different places. I like that. I prefer to speak of a map. I think these moral philosophers are like people mapping the same territory, but starting from different places and going different directions. They're mapping the territory of morality, but they're starting in different places, and they're going in different directions. But that doesn't mean they're not going to the same place, that they're not mapping the same territory, and you can get a fuller picture by putting their insights together. Now, of course, this can take a lot of work, and the work of finally putting it all together would perhaps have to be done by some real geniuses, like maybe Parfit. What do the rest of us losers do in the meantime? Well, you can always take the advice of the moral philosophers themselves. Follow the golden rule for a start. Do to others what you want them to do to you. This is one you'll find in major representatives of all three traditions. Kant representing the ontology, Mill representing utilitarianism, representing virtue ethics. Well, maybe not Aristotle, but that's there's a complicated thing to look at with respect to Aristotle and the Golden Rule. But keeping it simple, Confucius representing the virtue ethics tradition definitely teaches the Golden Rule. Also, Augustine and Aquinas representing virtue ethics. Now, here's some more general advice for a Christian. Ethics makes sense. God in his infinite wisdom has given us not only the Golden Rule, but the entire Bible. You can start there for an understanding of what's right. Start with the Bible, and don't stop learning from it until you die at any rate. And as you have time and ability, it's not a bad idea to learn a little wisdom about the good life, uncovered by some of the moral thinkers. You don't have to start with Aristotle, Confucius, Kant, Mill. You can learn from Christians who've already taken central concepts from these traditions and developed them in a Christian tradition. Let me make a couple of suggestions along those lines. N.T. Wright talks about virtue ethics from a Christian perspective in this book, After You Believe. John Piper talks about the greatest happiness from a Christian perspective in his book, Desiring God. I don't happen to have a copy in my office, though. And I would like to point to C.S. Lewis on obligations, but it turns out he also talks a lot about happiness and proper function. He's already done some integrating of some of these different moral concepts. Now, that's part of how we know the difference between right and wrong. And the idea of right and wrong makes plenty of sense. And no, it's not all subjective. There's just a lot of territory to cover, and it takes a lot of work to put together the final and complete picture. But that's the way it is with learning about anything. It takes a lot of effort by a lot of people to put together the final and complete picture on pretty much any topic. And that doesn't mean the rest of us are left in complete ignorance. It doesn't mean the study of the subject matter is a study in subjectivity, or that it's all relative or anything like that. No, it just means until the project has been completed, the rest of us have to go with the knowledge available to us. And the knowledge available to us is quite a lot. Good intentions, good character, the Golden Rule, all these things. And some good books that put together a coherent picture, and it's already put together for you. You can go read the books and find it. Thanks for watching.